listening to the SBP Podcast Mobile Filmmaking, episode 105, and I'm your host, Susie Botello. I welcome you to meet Travis Mills. Travis is a filmmaker who shot an entire feature film, a Western, one of 12 Westerns that he shot in 12 months with an iPhone. But really quick, before we do that, let me just remind you, go to our website for the International Mobile Film Festival in San Diego and get the details on how to submit your own films shot with smartphones, and find out about the film festival that is going to happen next April 2022 in San Diego. The website is internationalmobilefilmfestival.com. All right, so here we are, our guest, our cowboy of the year, cowboy with an iPhone, Travis Mills. Travis, how are you?
I'm well. Thank you for having me on this. Appreciate it.
Oh, you're so welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. I really appreciate it. Why don't you share a little bit with our listeners? I know I'm really excited to talk to you. You are the first person to have shot an entire feature film with an iPhone. That's not a first, but the fact that you shot a Western is pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was part of my 12 Westerns in 12 months project that I did last year in 2020, believe it or not. It would have been a hard project to do any year. And last year, I picked the worst possible year for it. Yeah, this is one of those 12 feature-length movies, and it's called The Woman Who Robbed the Stagecoach. It's the true story of a woman named Pearl Hart, who was one of the only women to ever rob a stagecoach. So it's a very fascinating story I got intrigued by and became one of the films.
Now, 12 films in 12 months, and one of them you shoot with an iPhone. Why don't you share a little bit about, first of all, what made you decide you were going to shoot 12 films in 12 months, and then why choose to film one of them with a phone?
Okay, well, the real answer to your question is that I'm crazy, right? Everybody knows that I'm kind of a little crazy, and in 2013 I did a project called 52 Films in 52 Weeks. I did a short film every week. That was kind of the beginning of this, because when that was over with, I had not completely destroyed myself yet. So I said, what's the next big challenge? And I continued to make features over the year. But that year I said, well, the next big challenge would be 12 features, one every month. But they can't just be any features, because you could shoot them all in your basement or a one room. I thought the Western would be an interesting genre to explore in 12 films. And the project developed over the years. And, as I was doing these films, one of my main goals was to just make them all very different from each other, to explore different aspects of the genre, to make them in different ways. So example, one of them is, a black and white artsy Western, and one of them is half documentary, half narrative. And then there's some more traditional ones. Well, the idea of shooting on the iPhone, most of us, a lot of people, I think, probably were mostly exposed to iPhone shooting when Sean Baker made Tangerine, right? That's probably become that was one of the main films that really broke through and showed people it was possible. Well, it's been rolling around in my head since then. I had done some music videos on iPhone. I'd done some behind the scenes. So I thought, shooting a Western on a phone would be kind of a bold move. And I kept looking for the right project to choose for that tool. And we bounced back and forth between a few ideas. At one point, we were even going to shoot one movie twice, once on 16 millimeter and then once on an iPhone, to compare the two different versions, which I still think is a wonderful idea that I would love to do someday, because I just think it would be fascinating to do the same script twice with those opposite, tools. But eventually, the Pearl Hart movie felt like the right one, because I wanted a French New Wave kind of on the ground, in the moment feeling to this story. I wanted it to feel like we were just there with them, not in a polished period piece environment. So for me, this was the perfect story for that.
Yeah, because it's kind of. I mean, are you showing in this story? I read a little bit about her story. It's kind of a heartbreaking story. Quite honestly, I was reading a bit about how this story all began. It's not like it's a big secret because this is historical,
Yep.
and the fact that she um sort of disappeared,
Yeah.
right?
And that was one of the things that made me most interested in her story. So someone originally gave me a newspaper and said, check this out. This is interesting. And I read about this woman who robbed a stagecoach, and I was kind of like, I don't see a feature film here. But then I never forgot about her. And eventually I did more research. And the more research I did, I thought before the stagecoach robbery and after is more interesting to me than just this robbery of the stagecoach. So, and especially the fact that she kind of has her 15 minutes of fame, and then she just disappears to the point where no one really knows what happened to her. There's theories, and it was interesting working on the movie, because especially with the lead actress, Lorraine, who first of all, does an amazing job. Second, had never acted in a film ever before.
Get
I
out. Are you
know. Isn't that
serious?
crazy? You've seen part of the movie now.
Yeah.
She's incredible.
Wow.
When she auditioned, I was going to cast someone else from California who was way more experienced and had actually played Pearl Hart before. And then Lorraine came into our casting call locally. And there was something about her that I was just like, this is amazing. And some of my peers, some of my collaborators were like, you're making a mistake by casting her out. And I said, no, casting non-actors can work if it's the right person. And obviously that was also true in Tangerine. Some of those people in Tangerine were just
That's
people,
right.
from the street, right? From that lifestyle. And
Do you think it's because you were using a phone as opposed to a traditional camera with all the connections and everything that come around that may have helped her, feel more comfortable to act?
possibly, I think not throwing her in an environment with 15, 20 crew members looking at her all the time might have helped her just kind of be, instead of thinking about the process as much. That's a good question. I'll have to ask that, and see if she has any insight. But she was just right for the role. But one thing that was interesting is, as she read the script and as we were working on it, she and I actually kind of had a lot of head butting moments together, because she kept on saying, Pearl never turns into like one of her heroes. Why doesn't she become this famous woman or inspirational woman? And my answer would be, because she didn't. Because that's more like real life, is that, obviously there are great inspirational stories, but a lot of people don't do that. And that's what I really liked about this film, is that it didn't have a conventional it doesn't move in a conventional direction, right?
It's not Wonder Woman.
Nope. But to me,
Right.
it's more relatable. And it was interesting. It was a very interesting process collaborating with her, because more than any other actress in the past, and probably because she's not an actress, she's just a person, just an architect, she would argue with me a lot about the character. And sometimes she would, what do you call it? She would realize that the reason that she was fighting me was that what was happening to the character had happened to her, or something related had happened to her, and she didn't like that, so she was kind of
Oh.
fighting the truth. But it was a fascinating growing process for her, and for me as a director. It was like nothing I've ever done before, that's for sure. It wasn't always fun. It was fun sometimes, but in the end, I think that the end product is obviously what matters most.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, it's a great story. Like you were saying, from beginning to end. that's where the story goes. Now, I have this question that I want to ask you. This I was just thinking about this. You were shooting this all around the same area, right?
To some degree, it was all filmed in Arizona, but we traveled a decent amount. There's an area called Globe, Arizona, and a lot of it was shot there in kind of these mountains and mining area. But we also went to Yuma, Arizona, and we did this in August. And
Wow.
Yuma is one of the hottest places I've ever been. It was brutal, but we shot at the prison there where Pearl Hart was actually held, supposedly in her actual cell. There's not much left of the prison, but her cell is supposedly the one that they've kind of designated as hers. And that was amazing to be able to film there.
That was, yeah, that's what I was alluding to with the question was the, being able to shoot at some of the historical locations that, that accompany the story in the movie.
I'm always a fan of that because, Hollywood will shoot a movie that's set in Kansas, but film it in Mississippi. And that makes sense to them, I guess. But to me, something is lost in that a sense of authenticity. And, when you film in Arizona, because it actually happened in Arizona, and also you film with local people, you capture something that can't be faked. There's just an authenticity to the environment. It might be a little more rough around the edges, like you saw the scenes with us, riding through the landscape and all that. Maybe that's not as picturesque as if we went to Monument Valley or, shot in some areas of New Mexico, but it's probably more like the areas that they actually would have been escaping through.
Yeah, I mean yeah, and how true, because a lot of movies, right, that are derived from biographies and things like that are written tend to twist things up for the show, right? And I know there's not that much information, but you had to add some things, of course,
Yep.
to it. And also because you were talking about shooting in the areas with the locals, were there any locals that had some insights that could help with the story?
Well, definitely. There was a woman that kind of manages the films and some of the history in that area named Molly Cornwell. And she was helpful in putting costumes together and just having insight. And there were other people that had specific stories, some local historians and people that work at museums. I didn't read any books about Pearl because I feel like it's dangerous when you're approaching a project to read a book. You might just take too much from that book. What I did was I read as many of the articles about her from then, newspaper articles from then and now, and then I kind of cobbled together my idea of a timeline and the important things to show, and then invented within the characters themselves. Like not a lot is known about Joe Boot, the character I play in the movie, who was her accomplice, right? And there's kind of different rumors about him. Was he just like a dashing, handsome outlaw, or was he a German? One source said he was a German drifter. Were they friends or were they at odds? And so I just kind of had to make a decision there based on what I felt was most appropriate for this film.
That's really, really interesting. Okay, now I know, since you've shot these other films traditionally versus this iPhone film, why don't you share with us? I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued in everything you're saying, but share with our listeners and myself, of course, some of these backstories about the differences that you found with this. And when you did, so you had your DOP, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your, I call them DPs.
Yep, me too.
So you had your, yeah, so your DP was um working with a traditional camera, and the same DP now is working on the phone. Just share, I would love to know how that conversation took place.
The person that shot this film, the cinematographer, her name is Sushila Kandola, and I'd worked with her before, but actually not as a cinematographer. and I wanted to choose someone new for this, someone that I'd worked with her as an actress, but I knew that she also shot movies, and I felt like she was experimental enough. And I also thought, if I approach this with one of my regular DPs, it's going to be like battling a mindset, right? Whereas if I work with someone for the very first time, there's no mindset to battle. Everything's new together. And she did a great job of kind of approaching it that way. And one of the things that we were very on the same page about is when we first envisioned this, there was a question: should we get lenses? How much do we want to rig out the iPhone? And we both felt very strongly that we should not, because part of making the film was also, if you go out there with just your phone, not a whole lot of other add-ons, what kind of movie can you make? Just your phone and Filmic Pro. That's it, right? And that's
Right.
what we wanted to do, especially with that we shot on the 11 Pro Max, and there's 3 lenses. When that happened, I was convinced we had to shoot with a phone, because I'm like, they're giving us way more options now. So I'm really glad that we did that. We just basically, it was the phone, a little cheap, $30 gimbal, and a couple lights, and that's it. So it was quite an experience.
Wow, you found a $30 gimbal too.
I think so. Maybe it was more. I don't know. I forget. I forget. But it was cheap.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, the whole movie was made for probably a production budget of about, I don't know, I would say $6,000, maybe a little bit over $6,000. So that's pretty cheap for a 15-day shoot, you know. Um,
Yeah.
but I had to do films like that during the 12 Westerns, because I just had to get it done, you know.
Travis, you're an actor by nature, right? But you're also a filmmaker, but you're an actor too, right?
Well, I started off being more of a filmmaker and directing mostly. And then it's only in the last few years, last really during the 12, that I'd done acting before, but during the 12, I said, these people in front of the camera are having too much fun and I'm working too hard. I need to be able to have some fun too. And I started playing some of the roles, and I was like, wow, I really love this. And love playing certain kind of characters. I'm not good as the hero. I'm not that kind of person. That's not my type. But as a goofball like Joe Boot is, or as sometimes a really evil, psychotic bad guy, I can do these roles. But so yeah, it's something I enjoy.
Oh, that's pretty cool. All right. So, what brought you into this whole industry in the first place? Tell us a little bit about the little Travis who became uh, you.
Well, I have an interesting background. My parents are evangelical missionaries, and we actually grew up overseas. I was born in Ecuador. I spent a good deal of my childhood in not a very well-known place called the Comoro Islands off the east coast of Africa. So I grew up with this totally just kind of wild background, not a typical American kid, raised by American parents in a third world country. I was obsessed with movies from the beginning. My parents say I watched Mary Poppins 20 times in a row when I was a child. So they knew they had an extremist on their hands, and I stayed obsessed. I got more and more passionate about film as I went, and I did go to film school. Film school was not for me something that was that helpful, because I'm a kind of a self-learner. I have to learn through trial and error. That's why I make so many movies, is I'm constantly making mistakes and then trying to fix them. And in 2010, I started my company, Running Wild Films, in Phoenix, Arizona, with one of my retired professors. And I kind of just decided, hey, I'm gonna forget everything they taught me in film school. I'm gonna listen to Jean-Luc Godard and Werner Herzog, and I'm gonna pave my own way. And I've been making movies like a madman since then.
Wow. Now, can you compare your experiences in the first films that you made to this first iPhone movie?
Yeah, in some ways, because I think we were working with so little when I first started out, and just having to invent in all kinds of creative ways. And with this movie, we only, including myself, we only had a crew of 4 people for the iPhone movie. So in that sense, it was a lot like those older films. The budget was low, like those older films, and it was just kind of starting again because you have a new tool and you're inventing as you go, and we also didn't have a ton of experience shooting on an iPhone. So we were kind of learning, oh shoot, like we got to really watch the focus. We got to really watch the color balance. These are things that we don't have to think about as much with a regular camera. So we were learning day to day how to use the tool better and better.
How did you captured the audio for your iPhone movie in the traditional way, right? Externally or?
Yes, we did. We
Okay.
used like a simple H4n mixer with a boom mic. So, and I'm editing currently on Adobe Premiere. So it's not, I know some of these mobile filmmakers are, purists. They will do everything through the iPhone or whatever phone, and they'll even cut the movie. And that's admirable for sure.
Well, feature films are a different thing. I only know of one filmmaker, Jennifer Zhang, who did that, who edited her entire film on the iPhone. It's a 73-minute film.
Wow. That's a lot of work.
Right?
That's pretty crazy, yeah.
It is, and she wasn't thinking about that when she was doing it. She was just getting it done,
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it's the first time somebody's done that. Kind of like, I don't know that many people that have shot a feature film and have it be a Western and then shot it with an iPhone, or shot 12 movies, 12 features, Western feature films, or any features that I know of, in 12 months either.
I don't think it's been done. I couldn't find any record of it being done, and I can't find any record of someone shooting a feature-length Western on an iPhone. I know people have shot short films, I think, and that's really cool. And I love short films, but this was definitely an endeavor, and I'm glad I did it. There are times that it was incredibly challenging, like I said, especially with the year that we all had last year, but it was worth it. The films they stand the test of time, I think, and they'll be around much longer than I will be in some form, floating around on Amazon or YouTube. So that's important.
Well, and that's the other thing too, that you selected a story that has a historical value to it. So it's not like it can be just for pure entertainment. So it's sort of, it just goes in the bin. Here's another feature film type thing, not just because it's a Western, but you really chose a really good story to share about someone that, I didn't know about Pearl before, I read about her because of you.
Yeah, I think that basically a movie about her that really focuses on her is long overdue. There's been some Discovery Channel little episodes. There's back in the day in the 1950s, there were a couple TV episodes that would focus on her, but nothing really serious. And I wouldn't be surprised in the next 10 years if all of a sudden we hear, Keira Knightley is playing Pearl Hart in a movie or something, because I think it is a great story, and it's only a matter of time before someone with a bigger budget figures that out and probably gives it a different ending as well.
Yeah, well, I don't know the ending, guys, in case anyone wants to contact me. How does that story end? Don't ask me. It's historical, but I'm sure you're doing something to that too. Can I ask you something? How did you deal with the dust? Because you're shooting out in the desert, basically.
Yeah, I mean, the dust and the dirt was not as big of a deal. You mean in terms of keeping the phone clean and the equipment clean?
Well, yeah, and also because, so you're working with horses and people, and every time someone's walking around, they're lifting up dust, right?
Yeah, right.
And yeah, there's all these issues, and then that can also kind of hurt a little bit with, it can affect the focus or whatever, And so I just wanted to know how you were dealing with all that.
I mean, we were all very dirty. When you see us in the movie, that's not makeup.
It's real.
When I make these movies, and I'm acting in them, I'm usually quite a mess by the end of it. But yeah, I don't remember the dirt and the dust being as big of a deal as the heat. The heat was a huge deal with the iPhone, more than the other cameras we've used, like the Blackmagic. If we were not careful, it would overheat. We had to be very adamant about keeping an umbrella over the camera, shading it from the sun. A couple times we'd get careless and we'd do takes or rehearsals and we wouldn't have the umbrella. And then within 5 minutes, we had an overheated phone and we were kind of dead in the water for 20 minutes or so while it cooled down in the car. And so we kind of had we had to develop methods. The heat was the real brutal thing, not just on the phone, but on the people too. So I think the dust and the dirt just adds more authenticity to everything because we look like we're really out there in it, and people are always commenting about, I don't know, my car and my things. And I just say, look, I live in the dirt. Okay. I'm one with the earth. Okay. So it's just part of, I'm constantly on the move, making these movies.
I actually practically lived in a Honda Civic that was a stick shift and it had no AC.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and so everywhere I drove in the summer, my phone would die. It would just die. And I remember taking bags of ice from the freezer whenever I was leaving to put it in the little coaster thing where the drinks go.
Yeah.
And to set my phone on top of that and just watch everything melt within a half hour. It was just crazy.
Wow. That is crazy.
And then I'd get home and put it in the fridge.
Yeah. Yeah, the heat is no joke, that's for sure. Ugh.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. So how did you deal with the other movies? Are a lot of your actors? It's not. I mean, I want this to be about the iPhones and everything, but there's a huge similarity between making movies and making movies with iPhones.
Yeah.
And I think the whole thing is a learning curve for listeners. They want to hear everything. So you're making 12 films. Are you changing the people that are involved in each one each time? Are you shifting around? I noticed, some of the extras, right, that you had in your film were in different scenes and stuff because they were a community. But in the other films, I imagine, are you using the same people in the same crew or not?
Yeah, well, a lot of times the crew, behind the scenes crew, would change just because, they're working so hard. They couldn't necessarily do back-to-back films with me. That would be pretty tough. So they had to have a break.
That's your superhero strength, right?
Well, yeah, I almost, pushed myself to the limit. There was one person, my friend John Mars, who also acts in the movies. He acts in a lot of them, but he was pretty much behind the scenes on 9 of the movies. So other than me, he was there most of the time. Now, what's cool, if anyone's a Western fan, they know that back in the day, if you're watching John Ford movies or Howard Hawks movies or any of those films, you see a lot of familiar faces over and over again. And you might not know their names, but you're like, okay, this guy plays the outlaw in this one. And in this one, he's the judge. And in that one, he's the doctor. And that was what was kind of cool about those movies. And we don't have that as much anymore, character actors. What's kind of cool is that naturally happened during the 12 Westerns is that a sort of stock company formed, and you started, if you watch the films on Amazon, you start to see familiar faces popping up, and someone might be a really big role in one and then have a little cameo in the next one. And I think that's really cool. And people who are kind of devoted to watching them are really enjoying that aspect. And we would rely on some of the same extras. Some people would travel, several hours to be extras in the film. A couple guys came down for a few of the films to from Minnesota. So that was pretty wild, but it was worth their time.
So, what about working with the horses? Did that slow you down a lot, or?
Horses are not easy to work with by any means. I think we got better with it every film, understood them a little bit more every film, had some good horse wranglers. So that's really the trick, is the people that own the horses or that are wrangling the horses really know what they're doing. So it didn't slow us down a ton. I mean, the main horse that you saw featured in the movie, her name is Lucy. And as you saw, both Pearl and I ride her all around. She was incredible. She never gave us any trouble. And Pearl was a great rider, much better than me. It was fun. You saw that scene where I almost fell off
Yeah.
the horse, which I think is pretty funny.
Pearl saved you.
Yes, she did. That was not planned, actually. The horse started to take off, and I couldn't quite get on, and then there you go. She grabbed me and pulled me on. So it was pretty funny.
Yeah, she stayed in character basically, because she was carrying you in the story as well. Right?
Yeah, exactly. It was a perfect character moment, which was great. So yeah. But yeah, overall working with the horses was great. The stagecoach was a challenge for sure. And again, with the heat, having those horses out in the heat, we had to, put wet towels on them and try to keep them as cool as they could be. So
all right. Let me ask you a couple questions now. You've edited you're in the editing process, right, of this?
I am, yeah, and I'm kind of working towards a deadline because the film is already set to premiere August 28th in Tempe. So as I'm prepping this new film in Idaho, I'm working hard on finishing the edit for The Woman Who Rode the Stagecoach, and then I'll move on to the sound mix and all of that stuff. So it's juggling a lot of things at the same time.
That is so crazy. I can't get over the fact. So listeners, I'm constantly pushing you, make a movie, make a movie, make a movie. And most of the time I'm just saying, just make a short film. The fact that you have a mobile phone, speeds up the process a lot. And you're going to have that little conversation with someone about making a feature film here. And you're going to go, there's going to be that one time when you go, well, there is this guy named Travis. And so there really are no excuses anymore. What would you say directly to our listeners? Because like you said, I mean, it is a struggle to do. But no one in filmmaking does it because it's, it's all, this flowery, rosy, experience. But what would you say to them to inspire them to maybe they want to make their next Western film? What are some things that you could advise them on and then inspire them to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's just, you can't take no for an answer, and you have to constantly make some level of progress on your projects, and that might be slow, but you can't just stay in your house and think about all the things that you should do or want to do. You need to make daily progress. I mean, the way I'm able to do what I do is that my Google Calendar is full of tasks, and every day I chip away at them. And at the end of every day, I've added more. And the next day, it looks just as daunting, but then I approach it and I chip away again, right? And it's just making baby steps towards getting everything done. And then all of a sudden, I've gotten a tremendous amount of things done, and what might seem impossible, getting funding, finding horses, finding a location, it comes with time if you just work, and finding good collaborators is really, really tough, but you just have to, it's so much trial and error, and I've been doing this that way for 10 years. And I've faced things this past week that are incredibly discouraging. And it's about falling down and picking yourself back up and moving on and continuing to create, and it's never going to be easy, but it's worth it, I think, in the long run.
You sound like a real cowboy.
Well, I'm not a cowboy as much as some of the people that I work with, but I've definitely become more of one through this process, that's for sure. But I appreciate you saying that. That's very, very nice compliment, very flattering.
Well, you said, the whole thing about, falling off and picking yourself back up.
Yes,
that's
true.
Very, very typical, and dusting yourself off, right?
Yes,
basically.
yes, absolutely. Yes.
That's fantastic. Well, one last thing I want to ask you. Just name 3 of your most favorite films outside of Mary Poppins. Something you watched as an adult or maybe you're still watching Mary Poppins. I'm sure you are, actually.
No.
But that really said to you, this is something I want to go for. This is the kind of movie ultimately I'd like to make when I feel like I'm not making any mistakes anymore, which that day will never come, but still, what would you say?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I'll cheat a little bit. Really anything by the filmmaker Werner Herzog, because not just his movies, like maybe Fitzcarraldo, about the guy who hauls a boat over a mountain in between 2 rivers in the Amazon, but also the way he does films. His writing is so he's been through so much, more than any filmmaker that I can think of, so much adversity in trying to get his movies made. So his interviews are almost like my Bible. I return to them and remember that this guy was, thrown in prison in Africa when he was making a documentary there, So him and his work would be one. An older filmmaker named Howard Hawks, some of his movies like Only Angels Have Wings, not just the films, but also the ethic behind the films. They're all about professionals. And the question of all of his characters is, what's the best you can be? Are you good enough? Are you good enough to do the job? And when I started to see that in his films, whether they're about cowboys or pilots or people on safari, that ethic was really interesting to me, and I related to it a lot. You don't see that a lot in our culture anymore, but it's all about just professionalism and are you good enough? And then finally, I would say the movie Witness, with directed by Peter Weir with Harrison Ford. He's one that I'm reading his book right now, and it's just, that's kind of what a perfect movie looks like to me. Romantic, violent. I hate to say it, but I want to make romantic, violent, beautiful movies. So that really move people, and that would be my end goal, I think.
What's your favorite part of making movies? Is it the writing, post-production, production?
At this point, it's still being on set, and it has been. Really being on set in the moment, directing, is my favorite, because there's so much problem solving. Sometimes it's infuriating, but feeling like, people always laugh because when the thunderstorm shows up to ruin our movie set, that's when I turn on and they see me become a different person, and they're like, "You're happy right now." And I said, "Yeah, because we have a problem and I need to figure it out." Right. But there's also other problems on set, like, human beings that you can't really figure out, unfortunately. That's something you can't solve, but
yeah, those are tougher.
Yeah, they're way harder than thunderstorms, tornadoes, and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think that being on set, watching it come to life, post-production is cool. It's not where my passion lies, and I feel as I get older, I may start to transition into writing more. I'm starting to kind of feel myself leaning that way. But right now I still enjoy being in the trenches. It is kind of like a war, and I enjoy being out there as a soldier in the trenches.
Well, I could imagine that someone who takes on the challenge, and like you said at the beginning of this episode, um, definitely loves to be on the set because that's when all the craziness happened. That's I shot. I didn't shoot it, but I was part of a production in Big Bear. In April, at the beginning of April, end of March, snow
Oh
blizzards. We were
wow.
shooting a Civil War movie about Walt Whitman.
Oh wow. That sounds good.
Yeah,
What's it called? Is it done?
I think it's like, well, I don't know whatever happened to that film. It's one of those.
Oh shoot, because I love Walt Whitman, so that would be
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, I would love to. Considering it took 3 weeks and everyone worked so hard on it. Yeah, I would love to know whatever happened to that movie. I don't think much happened, but it was I was a production coordinator, so I spent most of my time putting out fires.
Yep.
And everything that was a challenge. If you listen to some of my podcasts, I talk about them because I can't forget how much fun I had in this production. It was wild and crazy. I remember when they were shooting the cannons, and they had the Civil War reenactors that they brought in,
Yeah.
right,
Right.
for these scenes, and they were shooting these, their guns, and they had little like gunpowder in them, but it doesn't go very far. It was just like it's just the powder, right?
Right.
And I'm standing in front of it. This is so cool. This is so awesome. I've never been shot at directly where I'm just standing there going, go ahead and shoot. And everybody's like, you're so crazy.
Yeah.
And I was like, you only live once.
Yeah.
Right? Where can you reenact something like this ever?
Well, I can relate to that because we use blanks in our Westerns. We try not to ever use digital if we can help it. And I'm always, my friend that I mentioned, main collaborator, John Mars, is always telling me, you're too close to the blank with the camera, or whatever. And I'm like, I'm okay. Trust me, I'm okay. You know what I mean? We can sacrifice me, but we can't sacrifice the shot. So I totally get that. Absolutely.
Yeah, you're crazy too.
Yep.
In that sense, but yeah, and running in the rain, some of the cables and the generators and the lights when you're out there, they're as thick as my leg.
Yeah, right.
And you're like bouncing around like a rabbit trying to get things. It's the most awesome thing, and they're our listeners are just going, these guys are crazy.
They are,
but
yeah.
it is. You kind of have to be crazy to do this, and I encourage all of you to go nuts and do this stuff because it is a lot of fun, and it's something that later on in life, you know what I mean. You'll be able to tell your grandchildren that you were too close to the blanks.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. You'll be able to, if I live long enough to be a grandfather, then I'll have lots of great stories to tell them. Probably that my children will say, stop telling them that. You're a bad influence. But yes, it will be fun for sure.
What a great pleasure it is to be a bad influence on grandchildren.
Yes.
Grandfathers, grandmothers, who cares, right? Like, that's awesome.
Absolutely. This has been fun. Well, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And now I have to ask you the very, I keep teasing you, the very last question. When's the next smartphone film that you're going to make?
For me, everybody expects you to kind of repeat yourself. It's like when Sean Baker made Tangerine, they're like, aren't you going to shoot all movies on iPhone now? And it's an odd thing that we do because we're like, no, artists or creators are always wanting to switch things up, right? But I think for me, I loved the experience and I will do it the next time that it feels right. And it's a gut thing. I think I'll just know I'll write a script or one will come my way and I'll say, this is another iPhone movie. And the next time, my main goal I want to shoot it myself. I want to be the director and DP. I think that would be very immersive and fun. So that will be the next challenge.
Yeah, that's one thing that I'm noticing with actors too, is that they are making their own films. There was a feature in 2019 that won the best feature, and it's called Madhouse. This guy from Australia, he's an actor, and he shot that film, uh, acted in the film, directed the film, wrote it, and edited the
Wow.
film.
Wow.
Right? Yeah, pretty impressive what people are doing. It's not so much because they're doing it on a phone. It's because the phone gives them, it's such a challenge. When you're faced with a challenge, I'm sure you understand this very well, but sometimes without the challenge, you don't know what you can do. You don't put your best out there, and what you produce is incredible because you had a challenge to do it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that, I'm not going to be able to get the quote right, but that favorite filmmaker of mine, Werner Herzog, said, when you heat up metal or something like that, basically when you put something under incredible, heat, then it changes its form, right? And that his argument that was that the artist or humans can kind of be like that. When pushed to the limits, they'll show you something new, something different. So I think that's kind of an interesting idea, is really challenging yourself, and you show yourself something that you never thought was even possible.
Yeah, you got to make it happen now. You've already started it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I know you're busy. Thank you so much for being on the show. Say goodbye to our listeners.
Thank you so much for listening. And Susie, I really appreciate it. This has been a great pleasure talking to you, and hopefully it's not the last time we chat.